like a hen gathers her brood. I'll admit that is not the sort of thing that I know anything about. So thank God for YouTube, where I could easily find a video of a brooding hen. I watched a 10-minute or so video of this happening, and the story played out like this. A dozen eggs were carefully placed in a box that was filled with straw. And then a hen was placed near those eggs in the box. And quickly, the hen made her way toward and then onto the pile of the eggs. But as you can imagine, a dozen eggs makes for a fairly sizable collection. So as the hen nestled in on top of those eggs, a few of them were still exposed beyond the cover and protection of her body. So she quickly, but gently as well, situated herself, somehow expanding her body. And then I could only see slivers of the outer edges of a few eggs. She adjusted a little bit more and somehow expanded just a little bit more until I could no longer see any bit of egg showing. Now, I don't know if what happened next in this video is common or not. Again, I don't know much at all about any of this. But there was a moment after the hen was settled in that a human hand appeared in the video, and it was holding a tin can full of food. The hand set the food down just out of the reach of the hen, but close enough that the hen would have been aware that it was there. But the hen didn't move. In fact, she only began to eat anything at all after that hand scooped some of that food out of that old tin can and held it right in front of her beak where she could eat without moving at all. It was quite clear to me, in this instance at least, that that hen knew her job and she was committed to the work that she had to do. Isn't it interesting then that Jesus would draw upon this kind of simple act, a scene played out all over the countryside right now, as he tells the Pharisees what he was here to do. In the midst of this Lenten season, we are spending some time considering just exactly what it was that Jesus was here to do. And we're focusing specifically on the way Jesus brought people together, or the way he organized a community of followers. Our gospel lesson today, as Stephanie has read for us, shows us just how important it is for Jesus to organize a community and how painful it can be when some who should join in resist to be a part. How often I have desired to gather you just like a hen gathers her brood under her wings. Or if I might put it plainly today, Jesus showed up to organize a community of people who gather in the embrace of God's good love. Now, that's probably no surprise for anyone who gathers in a place like this on a Sunday. But I've often felt in my own thinking and in our broader conversations throughout the life of the church that it's easy to miss some connections here. As if, yes, Jesus sought to bring people together to create a community of followers, but somehow that's something different than the rest of what he did in his earthly and public ministry. As if Jesus made his way through the world, proclaiming good news over here and healing someone over there, and as he was passing by, setting a person free who was on his path over here. And he taught in the places where they wanted him to teach, and he built a community of disciples. I'd like us to see those pieces much more closely connected. They are all a piece of the work of Jesus' mission in this world of organizing a community of disciples. When Jesus burst onto the scene, and that's the only way you can explain it from Mark's gospel, he just appeared. He burst onto the scene and he proclaimed, God's kingdom is here now. He was calling us to see that all that was to follow, everything that he did in his ministry, was about that very thing. So when he healed a woman who had to push her way through a crowd just so that she could touch the hem of his garment, the power that healed that woman was the power that brought her into the community. That woman, of course, had a health concern that afflicted her physically, but it also made her ritually unclean. Her healing meant that she was now able to be a part of the people once more. And Jesus' work of setting oppressed people free, that was about putting the community back together as well. You might recall the demoniac who had been exiled or banished to where the tombs were. He scared everybody in town, so they wouldn't let him be a part. And the moment Jesus set him free, he told him, go back to the people, live among them, be a witness of the way that I am putting a community together. And it isn't just the healing and the exorcism that Jesus notes in our gospel lesson today. In Luke chapter 4, when Jesus rolled out the scroll from Isaiah to tell us why he was here, he said he showed up to proclaim good news to the poor, to release those who were captives, to give renewed sight to those who couldn't see, to bring freedom to all who were oppressed, and to proclaim that God's favor was with the people. It was all because Jesus knew that poverty and prisons and oppression and inability to see and bondage and the lack of a sense of God's nearness were all threats to the kind of community that Jesus showed up to build among us. It was all connected. And it was all about the way that Jesus was organizing a community. And as good as all of that sounds, and as much as you'd think everyone would rush to that kind of work to celebrate it, we know that truth tellers and prophets have always faced the threat of foxes like Herod. The ones who maintain their grip on power by keeping people separated from one another, by making us feel alone, oppressed, and keeping us bound in fear. It wasn't only Jesus who faced a fox like Herod. In more recent times, we recall the memory of Dietrich Bonhoeffer and Dr. King, Oscar Romero, just to name a few. These were truth tellers and prophets who were silenced because they also had a vision for communities of justice, equity, and belonging. But it was Jesus who most of all gave us a good vision of the kind of community that God seeks to make among us. And with great love and great courage, Jesus is clear about his mission and his calling in this world, and he's not hindered by the cost. As a church, we too are called to be about the work of organizing a kind of community in the ways of Jesus. And the more clear that we are on that mission, the richer will be the bonds of love that hold us together, and the greater will be our witness in the world beyond these doors. We are indeed at a moment in which we need to be very clear about our calling. We need to know that we are here and the things that we do are about organizing a community in the ways of Jesus. I believe we've made some significant strides in that direction. We started in 2022 to get really serious about listening to one another. And because of that, we have deepened bonds of community among us. We discerned missional priorities out of what we heard. We realigned our ministry structure around the things that we said matter to us. We're even renovating the spaces that are right below you now to align so that this is a place that communicates in all that we do: hospitality, welcome, belonging for people who would enter this place. As important as that was 2.5, 3 years ago, the stakes seem really high right now, which only means that the opportunities before us are more profound. Like Jesus, we're called to follow in his ways, to be healers, to set people free, to make space at our tables, to flip over a table or two, particularly the kinds that do harm, and instead to build a community of love and care, and to be people who know how to lament when community does not form as it should, and to be a people who live with clarity that brings about a sense of urgency for our calling, and then to be courageous, to do what we know God has called us to do. But something else emerges in this passage in our gospel lesson. That's all there, but there are a few pieces here that I think we might sort of scoot by a little too quickly. Jesus was patient. As he lamented that Jerusalem, the city that killed the prophets, should have been the ones that accepted him, he knew that their current state was not going to be their final state. You will see me again when you join in the community that sings together. Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. And Jesus held out a sense that those who do harm today are capable of being transformed. I hear a lot of purity stuff going on, that we can't like a person because they do this or they do that. I don't want to put anybody at harm, but we need to have a bigger vision of redemption, so that there's space within our community when someone says, I've done harm and I don't want to anymore. I've said a lot in the last handful of years about community organizing. I'd like to tell you today a little bit more about why I keep bringing this up. So in 2021, in the middle of the pandemic, I attended Gamaliel Network's National Week-Long Training. It's a network of community organizations that trains people to do organizing work. And sitting, because it was in a pandemic, sitting in the parsonage on my laptop for hours and hours and hours that week, I realized each day of that training that community organizers have some tools that can help us be who we are supposed to be, so that we can do the things that we are called to do. So a couple of years later, I'd been your associate pastor for 8 years, and I knew I was going to become your lead pastor, one of the very first things that I did with some people sitting in this room today was to ask the SPRC if we could reimagine my role as your pastor, to consider it as a pastor as organizer. They asked some very good questions. Carla asked some excellent questions. And ultimately, they trusted me enough to say, yeah, let's play this out a little bit. In 2025, I still aspire to be a pastor organizer among you, because I believe in the deepest parts of my being that we need to be the kind of community that Jesus organized in the world. And I don't know of a better way to do that than through the active listening and power building that community organizers taught me. I'm more convinced than ever that we can foster even deeper relationships among ourselves. And we can be the source of, and that can be the source, I should say, of even greater missional clarity for a church that's pretty serious about its mission already. I've seen a tool as simple as a 20 to 30-minute one-to-one conversation become the very thing that sparks the fire in a person's soul as they're drawn in to the bonds of community, but also then set free to do the things that God has called them to do, even when moments before they weren't quite sure that God remembered who they were. If Nancy Antone Jensen's sitting back there, or I ask you to consider being a listener for our upcoming listening campaign, or in the next couple of months, if someone asks you to have a one-to-one, I hope you'll keep what I've just said in mind. The world needs people of faith to get very clear about how important God's kind of community is for a world where people feel isolated and divided and afraid. So I just ask you today, are you serious about the kind of community that Jesus would build among us? I'll give you a second, but that's not a rhetorical question today. Are you serious about the kind of community that Jesus wants to make out of us? Yes. Do you want to be part of it? Yes. Then I'm excited about what comes next for us as a congregation. May it be so. Amen.